Hey guys, Mr. Cole here. I wanted to record a quick video giving you a little bit of background on The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. It's a book we're going to be reading over the next 4 weeks or so, pretty much until the end of school. Um, so it's a short book. It's about 200 pages long. It's not incredibly difficult or anything like that, but it is, you need to know a little bit about the history, a little bit about what's going on at the time to totally understand the events of the book. So I thought it'd be helpful to make a little video for you. Really quickly about just a couple background notes about the author. So Fitzgerald was, the book was published in 1925, so that's kind of right in the middle of the Roaring Twenties. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. He came from kind of an upper middle class background. He went to Princeton, so he wasn't poor by any means. But one thing that I've read about him was that he lived in kind of like the smallest house in a rich neighborhood. And because of that, he always had a chip on his shoulder about money. So he's always kind of worried about not having enough money or status, and like a little bit insecure about his own position in society. And another little anecdote that's pretty famous about him was that he was dumped at one point. He'd fallen in love with this girl. She was very rich, very like kind of a socialite, very famous, and she dumped him because, and this is like the most savage breakup line ever. She said that rich girls don't marry poor boys. And so, because of that, he always had kind of a chip on his shoulder about money, and so that's a lot of what he wrote about was people trying to sort of rise up through social classes and make something out of themselves, and that's what The Great Gatsby is about. So let's move on and talk about what's going on during the time period. So the book takes place in 1922. World War One ended in 1918. So this is a time between World War One and the Great Depression. He was a part of what was called the Lost Generation. So in World War One, there were just tons and tons and tons of young men who were killed in war, and then they, when they came back, they were sort of traumatized and figuring out what to do with their lives. And then this is where the novel takes place. So the Roaring Twenties, the Jazz Age, it's also called the 1920s. That was a term that Fitzgerald himself came up with, the Jazz Age. So Prohibition is, I think it was 1919, I think, that the 21st Amendment was passed, which banned the sale of alcohol. So, I mean, you guys know how this works, right? If you guys are teenagers, if somebody tells you you can't do something, that doesn't mean that you just stop doing it. It just means that you find newer, sneakier ways of doing it, right? So that led to a lot of bootlegging of alcohol. And in fact, there was actually more alcohol in the 20s than ever. Because it just became more alluring and more appealing. So there was a lot of bootlegging going on, and what that means is, creating illegal alcohol. So speakeasies came into existence, and these were kind of like bars or establishments, whatever you want to say, that where illegal alcohol was sold. There's a lot of organized crime. Anytime you make something illegal, there's going to be organized crime coming in and trying to produce that for people. So Al Capone was around in the 1920s. John Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde. There's a lot more organized crime going on. The 1919 World Series was rigged around this time. It's not exactly the 1920s, but so if you think about this is an event that comes into play in the actual novel. So the 1919 Chicago White Sox were playing in the World Series, and if you think about kind of baseball back then was kind of America's sport. There was no football. There was very little entertainment. So baseball is a huge deal, and somebody was powerful enough to rig the World Series, right? So if you think about like what it would take somebody today to be able to rig the Super Bowl for gambling purposes, right? Like, so these organized crime members are gaining lots and lots of power. There's a lot of corruption in the police systems as well. There's an HBO series called Boardwalk Empire that chronicles all of this stuff, and it's really, really good. Although I probably can't technically recommend it because it's got some bad stuff in it. So, New York Police Commissioner John A. Leach watches officials pour liquor into the sewer following a raid. That's what this image is. So. Okay, so alcohol was banned. That didn't mean that it didn't exist, though, right? So adding on to that historical context, in the 1920s, people are beginning to rebel against social norms. This is a typo here, but so just ignore that. But you guys have probably heard of flappers. and then the Harlem Renaissance, which you read a Langston Hughes poem, which he was a really prominent member of the Harlem Renaissance. So African American artists are gaining prominence. Women are sort of stepping out of their traditional social roles and smoking and drinking and waiting longer until they get married and all of that sort of stuff. So people are living carelessly. Life is moving faster. Cars are coming into existence, are becoming more common, right? There were movie stars for the first time in the 1920s. So life is kind of just moving faster. People are having a good time, lots and lots of partying. The economy is booming. Then the Great Depression hit in 1929, and it put a stop to everything. The book takes place before the Great Depression, but a lot of people read the book as Fitzgerald's message was that this is too much of a good thing in the 1920s, and it's all going to come crashing down, and sure enough, it did. So the book takes place in 1922 in New York City, Long Island, a specific part of Long Island, which in the book, the two islands, and I'm circling them here. I don't know how well you guys can see them. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Oh, I don't think it's going to let me. There we go. Okay, so there are two little land masses here, East Egg and West Egg, and those are the two areas that the novel takes place on. So East Egg is an island, not an island. What would you call it? My geography is terrible. A landmass. We'll say that again. That is full of old money, which means people who have always had money, families who have been rich families forever. And then West Egg is new money. So West Egg is the area where the newly rich people go. So movie stars and celebrities and bootleggers, people who have gotten their money through gambling. So you can probably predict that the people on East Egg view themselves as being way better than and superior to the people on West Egg. So we'll learn where the characters in the book come from. Gatsby is from West Egg, Tom and Daisy, a couple other characters, and Jordan Baker are from East Egg. So we'll learn more about that. But 1922 in New York City. One thing, whenever in the book, whenever they say the word East, they're talking about New York City. Okay. If I can get to the next slide here, maybe. There we go. Let's read a little bit about the characters. First character is Nick Carraway. He's the narrator of the novel. He moved to New York from the Midwest. He lives in a small house next to Gatsby's giant mansion, kind of like in the shadow of Gatsby's mansion is Nick's little tiny house. He is the second cousin to Daisy Buchanan, and he knew Tom in college. He feels out of place in New York. So he went to New York to kind of strike it rich. It says he wanted to join the bond business, which means that he wanted to work on Wall Street, right? So he was trying to sort of strike it rich in the stock market like a lot of people were doing back then. Next character is Jay Gatsby. So despite being the title character, he doesn't appear until chapter 3 of the book. He's kind of this like mysterious, shadowy figure throughout the book. There are all these rumors that swirl about him, and nobody really knows very much about him. He seemed to appear out of nowhere in New York, and just suddenly there was this rich, glamorous person owning this mansion in New York, and nobody really knows his history. He lives next door to Nick, across the bay from Daisy Buchanan. He is in love with Daisy. They have a history. I won't say too much more beyond that, but he is a self-made man. Again, I won't say too much, but he is very rich, and he's made it through his own powers, or through his own abilities and talents, right? He hasn't gotten a lot of help from anybody. Next up is Daisy Buchanan. She is married to Tom Buchanan, and she's not thrilled about it. She's kind of just like living this listless, sort of like dull existence. She's rich. She drinks all the time. She's pretty much drinking throughout the entire book, but she's not exactly what you would call happy in marriage with Tom. She comes from a very wealthy family. She is very spoiled, materialistic, and selfish. She is Nick's second cousin. Back on this point, you'll find out that there aren't very many likable characters in this book. Daisy's probably the least likable character. I mean, she's just awful. But that's just one of the things with the book is that there's not exactly a person that you're rooting for, and I think maybe that's one of the points of the book is that these people are all kind of terrible in their own ways. Maybe especially Tom Buchanan. He's married to Daisy. He's not faithful to her. He is an ex-football player at Yale who still longs for his glory days. He He is a racist. You'll find out, I think, in chapter 1, he goes off on this racist tangent. He's reading this book that's really awful. Like Daisy and Jordan, he comes from old money, and he's very superior because of that. He knows that he's wealthy. He's very concerned with power and being superior to everybody around him. Myrtle Wilson is the next character. She's lower class. She is married to George Wilson, who owns a garage in the Valley of Ashes, which is an area between New York City and East Egg. So Tom goes into the city and kind of stops midway through and picks up Myrtle, who is his mistress, right? She longs for a better life. She's definitely a gold digger. She's not even really ashamed about it. She is having an affair with Tom Buchanan, but she wants him to leave Daisy. So Myrtle's kind of like desperate to join the upper class. She is from a poor background. Her husband is kind of this like spiritless, kind of just weak person who owns a garage and doesn't really stand up for himself. And okay, next character is Jordan Baker. So she's based on a real person. She's a famous golfer and socialite, friend of Daisy's. She comes from old money as well. She's kind of from a rich family. She is, and importantly in the book, she's a terrible driver. She's reckless and she's careless. She's kind of a stereotypical flapper in the 1920s. She has this very awkward romance with Nick Carraway. It's just kind of weird. Like neither of them seems to really like each other, but they somehow just kind of end up together. Okay, last slide here. Big theme that we're focusing on is the American dream. So just a reminder, the definition we have when James Truslow Adams coined the term, it says the dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement. So it's the idea that there's no such thing as social classes, right? They're fluid. You can be born poor and you can work really hard and then make something out of yourself. And so we've looked at a few different poems that think about this idea differently. The Langston Hughes poem was more, I think, focused on the idea that everybody doesn't have equal access to the American dream. Like, this is a great idea, but not everybody has access. But you should still keep trying, right? You should still keep trying to make a success out of yourself. The Walt Whitman poem, I Hear America Singing, was about all of the different people scattered throughout the country singing their song, right? So everybody's working hard, trying to kind of make something of themselves, and everybody's very united and positive and idealistic. So he, I think, had the idea that the American dream is a real thing that people can strive for. So the question that I want you guys to be thinking about as we read is, in The Great Gatsby, what argument is F. Scott Fitzgerald making about the American dream? This is just a really common way that that people read this book as that it's F. Scott Fitzgerald's commentary on the American dream. And so you have to decide whether he's saying, okay, yeah, this is a real thing that exists, or no, this is more of a myth that we just like to believe. So I want you to be kind of thinking about that as we read the book. That's all, and I hope that was helpful in getting you guys started with this novel.